You're listening to The Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
Welcome back, everybody, to The Greeks Gridiron. I'm Ethan Haristadoulou, and it's that time again for Friday afternoon. We are making predictions going into week number 16 of the NFL. The final 3 weeks of the season remain. We get this done, and all we'll have left is 17 and 18, and then it is playoff time. Took one on the chin last night trying to take the Broncos for the W on the road. Ultimately, they could not get it done, so we're starting out the week 0-1 with the Denver Broncos giving us that L, but we have 15 opportunities to make some correct predictions, so dive into that comment section below. Let me hear from y'all. Who do you like this weekend? What are you taking? Reminder, as always, I'm not a betting channel. I'm just a guy that likes to talk about football, share some predictions, give some scores, and let you all know where my head is at as far as the games go. So keep that in mind as you are making your own selections. That being said, first matchup of the weekend that we're looking at here, 1 o'clock on Saturday. We got Saturday football now in the NFL for the remainder of the season. Texans going into Kansas City to take on the Chiefs. Patrick Mahomes will play. Wasn't even listed on the final practice injury report. And on top of that, they're also going to get Marquise Brown back in Kansas City as well. So this offense at this point in time, minus the injury with left tackle DJ Humphries, is basically at full health now. This is going to be the embodiment of what this Chiefs offense is supposed to look like in its entirety, essentially. And once Humphries is back in the fold, they're basically rolling into the playoffs as healthy as you could probably be going into the playoffs considering how long the season is. So with that in mind, we mentioned DJ Humphries. That's actually going to be the big thing that I'm focusing on here, because that left tackle position is obviously oh so important, protecting the blind side of Patrick Mahomes. And with Humphries out now for his second week in the row, I do have a little bit of just a concern in the back of my mind, because pass protection for Kansas City has been a little bit shaky over the last month. They've allowed 13 sacks in their last 4 games. However, they had 0 against Cleveland last week, so maybe some improvement there. I'm not really entirely sure, but it is definitely something worth keeping in the back of your mind, considering they're facing Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson Jr., who are a monster duo as far as pass rushers are concerned. They are currently the only pass rushing duo, I should say, with 10 sacks apiece. Only duo in the NFL right now, combining for a whopping 22.5 sacks, helping lead Houston to the number 2 ranked defense in terms of total sacks this season with 45. That being said, I do think that another thing that is worth mentioning about this game is going to be Joe Mixon and his ability to run the football for this Houston offense. It's been a bit of an up and down affair for Joe Mixon the last few weeks, basically since week number 10, alternating between these 100-yard games and sub-50-yard performances. We need to see a balanced attack from Houston if they want to be able to go into Kansas City and knock off the Chiefs here. So if you keep that in mind, you look at what the Chiefs' run defense has been doing so far this season, allowing just about 92 yards per game, which is ranked 3rd in the NFL. They're also allowing just 3.9 yards per attempt, which is tied for 2nd, and they're also tied for 4th lowest in EPA per play and 3rd lowest rushing yards over expected on the next-gen stats side of things. It's not boding too well for Houston there. If this is going to be a recurring thing now, where maybe some of the effectiveness of Joe Mixon is starting to fall off, maybe he's running out of gas, or it maybe just is the offensive line issues that we have talked about as well with Houston, that could be a bit of a disaster for the Texans at this current point in the season as we get set for the playoffs here. So definitely something just worth keeping an eye on there. Can they handle that defensive front from Kansas City, open up some running lanes, get Joe Mixon going on the ground so they're not falling into some one-dimensional pass-heavy offense where we're watching CJ Stroud throw for 35, 40, maybe 50 passes in a single game if need be. On top of that, couple of injuries just worth noting as far as the Texans are concerned. At the time of this recording, always want to make sure that is loud and clear, Juice Scruggs and Foley Fatukasi are the 2 guys listed as out for Houston. I'm not sure if there's anyone else at this current point. As of the moment I'm recording, there is not. But just a couple of key pieces on both the offensive and defensive side in the trenches worth noting there. As for who I think is going to win the game, though, I'm expecting this one to be a little bit of a lower scoring affair here, just because I think defenses do win out a bit in this contest. I'm actually really excited to see what this Chiefs offense looks like with Marquise Brown and just how much of an impact he's going to have. I don't expect it to be a lot, but his presence on the field is something defenses will have to respect going forward, and I'm sure Houston will keep that in mind as well. And I've honestly had a very hard time settling on this game because I do think that Houston has a good opportunity to play spoiler and give the Chiefs their first loss since going down to Buffalo a handful of weeks ago. But I think I'm going to go Kansas City and play it safe on this one here. It really pains me because I really feel like Houston has a shot in this game, and I think if there was ever a moment for you to let the NFL know that you have arrived and really make your case for being like a legitimate contender in the league, knocking off Kansas City, as so many teams have failed to do aside from Buffalo, would be the opportunity to do so. But I like the Chiefs. Tight, lower scoring affair, 21-17. Well, next we'll look at the other Saturday matchup. This is an AFC North clash. We're looking at the Pittsburgh Steelers going into Baltimore to take on the Ravens. This game has a lot of AFC North just consequences on the line right now. With this game here, Baltimore has an opportunity to really kick the door open into potentially being able to win the AFC North division. With Pittsburgh wide receiver George Pickens out for this game here, I am a little bit concerned about the state of Pittsburgh's offense at this current moment. When you look back to game number 1, was not a pretty affair. Offensively, a lot of inability to finish drives from Pittsburgh's end here, winning off of 6 field goals. And had Justin Tucker not missed a pair of field goals in that game, which would have made all the difference, we're maybe having a completely different conversation about where these teams are right now, because the Ravens would already have that leg up and be sitting at 10-4 to Pittsburgh's 9-5. So this is a very, very consequential matchup, not even just for the AFC North, but just the AFC playoff picture as a whole. Lamar Jackson going up against the Steelers defense. It was a tough day for the potential MVP hopeful in Jackson during game number 1, completing just 48.5% of his passes for 207 yards, touchdown and a pick, the lowest yards per attempt number of the season for him at just 6.3 yards per. Pittsburgh brought a ton of pressure in that game, getting after Lamar Jackson on about 40% of his dropbacks. They only managed a couple of sacks, though, but with TJ Watt good to go and Alex Highsmith in this game as well this time around, it's going to be tough sledding for the Ravens here offensively, and I could expect to see maybe more pressure and even an extra sack or 2 on top of that, too, the Steelers racked up in game number 1. And on the topic of George Pickens also being out, as I had mentioned earlier, I do think that whoever steps up in this game is going to be a crucial piece for why Pittsburgh ultimately wins if that ends up being the result here. George Pickens in the first game, 8 receptions, 89 yards. He basically had half of the team's receiving yards in that contest there. And Russell Wilson, with George Pickens out now, is sitting on just 286 yards thrown in the last 2 weeks. We need to see more from Mike Williams. We need to see more from Pat Freiermuth. We need to see more from Van Jefferson. Calvin Austin obviously looked pretty good last week as well, but I think those other 3 guys that I just mentioned there, you're going to need to see a lot more from them in this contest if Pittsburgh wants to come out and win. There's no real guarantee you're going to find success running the football against Baltimore. They rank first in rushing yards per game allowed, first in yards per attempt allowed. And while Najee Harris and Jalen Warren did average about 4 yards per attempt with about 100 or so yards on the ground, again, that's a grind. That is not something that typically happens too often against this Baltimore team, so you can't really bank on that. This has been a pass defense in Baltimore that has struggled mightily this season for basically the entirety of the year. Throwing the football might be the key to success, so they've got to find some receptions, some yards, and maybe even a touchdown or 2 from some of those other guys that I just mentioned there. As for who I think is going to win the contest, though, Baltimore really let the Pittsburgh Steelers get away with one the last time that these two teams played, and I know that that is weighing on their mind. And that was in Pittsburgh, mind you, the last time they played. This time around, we're in Baltimore. I think that loss had weighed heavily on the Ravens, and since then have been just waiting for this opportunity to get one back, and something tells me they get the job done. I expect a knockout, just street fight type brawl, typical AFC North contest. Maybe not a ton of points, but we're going to see some action, some physicality, and I'm going to take Baltimore 23-21. Now moving into Sunday's games. New York Giants heading into Atlanta to take on the Falcons. Michael Penix is making his NFL regular season debut, and I'm very curious to see how this all shakes itself out because you have so much skill talent over there in Atlanta, and it's an offense that honestly should have been producing a lot more than it has over the last month or so, give or take. I think the first thing you really want to look at with Atlanta, if you want to come away victorious in this game here, is getting your running back Bijan Robinson going early in this contest. A rookie quarterback's best friend on offense is a strong run game. So lean into Bijan Robinson, who is quietly having a massive year. If it wasn't for guys like, if you're looking at what Josh Jacobs has been doing in Green Bay, or of course Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry in Philly and Baltimore respectively, people would probably be talking a little bit more about what Bijan Robinson's been doing this season, because he's sitting on 1,100 yards, 8 rushing touchdowns as well. Big leap from what his numbers last season. So get going on the ground here. It's not like the Giants are the best run defense in the NFL by any stretch of the imagination. They are allowing the second most rushing yards per game at about 144 per. And on top of that, they're also allowing 4.9 yards per attempt and lead the league in rushing yards over expected at plus 510, which is a whopping 226 yards more than second place. Them and the Carolina Panthers have been trying their absolute best to kind of one-up each other in who is the worst run defense in whatever statistical category they can possibly find, and they're doing a great job of splitting up the numbers between the two. This is a team you can run the football against. On top of that, the other thing I'll be interested in watching here, a little bit more of a trench watch type of thing here, Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, the health of Brian Burns, and also just how healthy is he, and realistically speaking, how effective can he be in this contest here? They're going up against left tackle and right tackle Jake Matthews and Caleb McGarry, respectively. Burns is, like I said, banged up, but he is expected to go against ATL as far as I know to this current point here. Brian Burns has 8 sacks, 57 pressures so far this season. His 57 pressures are good for 7th most in the NFL. And Kayvon Thibodeau, obviously a bit of a tough year for him with injuries and whatnot, but he does have a respectable 28 pressures on the year, 3 sacks as well. When you look at just this matchup as a whole and the way these two sides are going to be going up against each other here, Jake Matthews has allowed a 12.7% pressure rate, which is actually 4th highest amongst left tackles with at least 150 pass blocks this season. And then Caleb McGarry on the other side, a 7.9% pressure rate, which is 16th lowest amongst right tackles with at least 150 pass blocks. So you've had about average to even slightly below average just overall pass protection coming from your tackles here. There is an opportunity for Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau to take advantage of that, maybe make some noise, make a big play or two, and make a rookie quarterback's life hell in his very first NFL start. As for who I think is going to win this contest, though, listen, I don't want to sit here and say never with potential upsets and whatnot, but where the Giants currently stand right now, things are just downright ugly for them. They are in pole position for that number 1 overall pick in the draft, and I think very much this team wants to draft a quarterback. I'm not saying that there's people over there tanking, but I don't think they'd be too mad in the Giants organization if they wound up with the number 1 overall pick. I don't necessarily know who's going to get fired, who's not going to get fired at the end of this season here, but if the opportunity of selecting your next franchise quarterback is there and you're in the driver's seat for it, it would make sense for the Giants to just keep on losing football games. I think Atlanta, with a slim chance still of potentially being able to win themselves the NFC South, are really hoping that Michael Penix is ready to go, and I feel like he wouldn't be coming in if he wasn't ready at this current point. Coming off of an ugly win last week, Atlanta should be able to get the job done against the Giants, and I have them winning 24-17. Now we'll look at the Arizona Cardinals going into Carolina to take on the Panthers. Big thing for me in this one here. We just kind of touched on run defenses in the Giants, and I briefly mentioned the Carolina Panthers in that last contest there. Arizona, just give it to James Conner. Let him run wild. Let him do his thing. He is one of the most underrated backs in the NFL and someone that I wish got more love because he does not get enough conversation with just how consistent and how good he is each and every single week. And it's a product of him being in Arizona. I get it, but I would just love to see him get more love from everyone else around the NFL and just fans alike. No one is even close. And I did say the Giants are doing a good job trying to, maybe snag a statistic or two here or there, but Carolina is the worst run defense in the NFL. They are allowing a whopping 173 yards per game on the ground. That is the most by 30 yards per game. So they're 30 ahead of the Giants, who we just talked about a second ago, who are number 2. That's almost half a football field more worse. That being said, you look at what James Conner has been able to do over here in Arizona. almost 1,000 yards. He's sitting at 973. 4.5 yards per attempt puts him in the top 20 of the NFL. 7 rushing touchdowns to boot, and his rushing yards, that 973, good for 10th best in the NFL. He has been extremely effective for this offense, and when he's going on the ground, things open up in the passing game. Kyler Murray's able to take advantage, get the football into the hands of guys like Marvin Harrison Jr., run the football against this Panthers defense. I've been pounding that table all season long for basically every single one of their opponents, and I will do the exact same here as well. The other thing I'm looking at here is just Bryce Young and how he performs in this contest here. I'm looking to see if he can have a bit of a bounce-back game because it felt like for a little bit, maybe he kind of figured it out and, learned from the benching, took some time to kind of just reset, regroup, and get back into it. And he had a pair of solid games against the Bucs and Chiefs. He racked up 561 yards in those games, couple of touchdowns, no interceptions. But in the last couple of games he's played against Philadelphia and Dallas, 2 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, not a ton of yards. The Dallas game looked pretty ugly. There is just a lot going on with this Carolina Panthers offense right now, and thankfully, you have an Arizona team that's about average against the pass this season in terms of yards per game allowed. They've also only taken the ball away 7 times through the air here. So you have a pass defense that hasn't been super, super strong, not super aggressive. They're not really picking off the ball too often. This could be a good opportunity for Bryce Young to have a bounce-back game, but I'm just not so sure if that's going to be the case. I'm a little bit worried about where this is trending right now, but I wouldn't be shocked to see the Panthers be competitive against the Cardinals in the same vein that we've seen them be competitive against some really good football teams like the Bucs, like the Chiefs, like I previously mentioned. I mean, they only lost by a possession to the Philadelphia Eagles not too long ago. So, I do think they can keep it close, but I like Arizona, and considering, in my opinion, this game means a lot to Arizona in their fight to potentially win that NFC West. They have a little bit more juice. They're, yes, traveling a bit, going into Carolina. I get that, but I think Arizona, better overall team with more on the line. They get the job done 26-23. Competitive affair, though. Next, we're looking at the Lions and Bears. And honestly, if looking at this game here, I do think that there is a chance we see a lot of points here because obviously, as we've seen with Chicago, it feels like since they fired Matt Eberflus, they've kind of just rolled over and they are very much looking forward to the end of the season here. Whereas Detroit, 16 different players, defensive players, mind you, defensive players only. That's not even including offensive guys. 16 defensive players currently sitting on the IR as Carlton Davis and Alim McNeil were the most recent guys to join that list coming out of week number 15. I'm very interested, and because I don't like to ring the season is over bell until it's actually really starting to happen. I don't like to try and predict that type of stuff, but I understand where people are coming from with just the concern about the health of the defense over there in Detroit. It's been getting bad. It feels like week over week. And at this point now, you're talking, again, 16 defensive players. At this point, you're basically working with second, third string, and practice squad guys in varying degrees all over the defensive side of the ball. At some point, that has to crack. And we have kind of seen it a bit these last couple of weeks. You look at the Lions, they've allowed 30 points in back-to-back games, even more than 30 points, at least 30 points in back-to-back games after not allowing more than 29 in their previous 12 games. The Bears, though, for what it's worth, their offense the last couple of weeks has been kind of dead on arrival since the firing of Matt Eberflus, so there may be the benefit in that, but to be fair, I think you have to at least have some concern about where this defense is and what Chicago might be able to do, because the way I see it, there's a lot of conversation right now about the 8-game streak and Caleb Williams not turning the football over, and that is all good. But I believe in that 8-game streak of no interceptions, there's at least 4 games where he hasn't even thrown a touchdown either. So, I mean, it's nice to tout the no interceptions thing, but that's such a tight window to be looking through in the grand scheme of what's actually going on there offensively in Chicago. So I'm curious to see just how the Lions fare, as Caleb Williams has at the very least taken care of the football pretty well. The other thing is just if this Bears defense can actually slow down what the Lions are doing offensively. You don't have David Montgomery, but you still have Jahmyr Gibbs, and that's not a bad running back to have in the event that your other running back goes down. You look at Chicago's defense allowing about 22 points per game, which is actually 11th best in the NFL, surprisingly, but they're ranked 19th against the pass, 26th against the run in terms of yards per game allowed. When you look at Detroit's offense, second in passing, they're 6th in rushing. They're leading the league with nearly 33 points a game average scored. I'm not saying that there's no chance Chicago can win. The game's in Chicago, so I know that complicates things a little bit more. I do like the Lions, though. I think that they're going to have another one of those pass happy type of days, maybe not lean into the ground so much and just kind of let Jared Goff do his thing. So give me the Lions, 33-21. Bears do get some points, but I'm expecting that the Lions come fourth quarter start pulling away. So like it could even be maybe a little bit closer than you'd like it to be, but by that fourth quarter, the Lions are scoring that touchdown to get to 33, or maybe they're already at 30, kicking a field goal to really put the game away, and they ultimately win by a couple of possessions. This next game here, I always hate picking AFC South games because I've talked about this a lot here on the show, is mainly just the fact that AFC South is a division where the better team always plays down to the lesser team, and it's never typically in a good way. So the way I see this game right now, first things first, Anthony Richardson, I don't really know if I can trust him against this Tennessee defense. And this is a Tennessee defense that I didn't necessarily believe in early on in the season, and I said some pretty tough things about them, but I have since come around and realized I was wrong. But Anthony Richardson, man, I mean, you want to talk about bad completion percentages? I remember watching Tebow Mania and all that going on when Tim Tebow came into the NFL. I somehow forgot, though, that his completion percentage was 46.5%. And the fact that Anthony Richardson is only 0.5% better than that right now at 47 is jarring. I don't know where this ends up going come season's end. I'm assuming Richardson gets at least another year to see what he can do, but we saw what happened to Tim Tebow, and I'm not saying that Anthony Richardson is Tim Tebow because he has size and athleticism that Tim Tebow just simply didn't have. Tim Tebow is an athletic guy, fun guy at quarterback, but I don't really know where this goes for Indianapolis. And Tennessee's been a good pass defense overall. I mean, third in yards per game allowed this season. They've shown that they can pick off the quarterback if given the opportunity. They had a couple of picks last week off of Joe Burrow, who's having a fantastic season this year. I mean, can I trust Anthony Richardson to lead this team past this Titans team that they barely beat just a few weeks ago? I don't know. And honestly, you look at what Tennessee's doing right now offensively, and I mean, now I'm asking myself, can I trust Mason Rudolph? I at least think that this is an upgrade over what they've been getting from Will Levis. So, I mean, you look at his last two games, passer rating of 90 or more. On top of that, 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Only reason he really went back to the bench was because Will Levis was back and Tennessee was really hammering the he's our guy narrative at the time. But now that Will Levis has been benched, I think you have the better of the two options in at quarterback, so it does make me feel a little bit better about Tennessee, and the Colts' pass defense hasn't really been that impressive. They're ranked 23rd in the NFL in terms of yards per game. D-line has found some success getting pressure on the quarterback and getting after him. They have 11 sacks in their last 4 games. But like I said, I mean, I don't really know who I like in this game. And honestly, for me, I think I'm looking more towards the running game of both these teams and who's going to pound the rock more efficiently and get their team in a position to win the football game. It's always tough to beat teams twice, and the first time around, the Colts, in my opinion, got pretty lucky to come away with a win in Tennessee. I don't know if that luck's going to run out in this game here, but I have no real confident pick in this game. I'm leaning Colts mainly because they're at home, but I'll be honest, not a confident pick. I'm taking Indianapolis, and something for some reason is yelling low-scoring affair to me once again, so I have Indianapolis winning 19-16, kind of ugly contest. Next, we'll look at the Rams traveling all the way across the country to take on the New York Jets. A lot on the line for the Rams in this game here. So much so that a loss here could really blow things up for them in the division race that they are currently in the thick of right now as the division leaders in the number 4 seed in the NFC playoff race. Because a loss here, potentially, and a loss here, and I believe a Cardinals win, if I'm not mistaken, it knocks you out of first place in the division here, and the Cardinals retake the lead. So there's a lot to look at as far as how this division plays itself out. I rolled the dice on the Jets last week after literally proclaiming the week prior that I was done picking the Jets, and I will say that I'm glad I went with my gut feeling on that one because I felt like the Jets were the better team against the Jaguars going into that contest. I felt a lot less certain about that coming out of the game, but they should have been winning that game, and I'm glad to see that they did. The traveling across the country does weigh on me a little bit about the Rams, though, so that is something of a concern here. But as far as weather is concerned, it's going to be cold, little bit breezy, but not anything too ridiculous that the Rams shouldn't be able to play. And I mean, Matthew Stafford, for what it's worth, not really a guy that I'm too worried about when it comes to playing in the elements, having played in the NFC North for so long. So, and he and Rodgers obviously have plenty of experience playing each other. So this rivalry getting renewed as well, but now on two different teams. I think the biggest thing for me is really just if the Rams pass rush can get after Aaron Rodgers. Jets have allowed a league low, which is crazy because it doesn't feel like this, but the Jets have allowed a league low 25% pressure rate this season. That's best in the NFL by almost a whole percent. 32 sacks as well puts them at about middle of the pack. And Aaron Rodgers versus the pressure this year has been kind of a mixed bag. 46% completion percentage, give or take, but 5 touchdowns to 1 pick. So it's about a 50-50 shot. He makes the completion, but he isn't really turning the ball over at the very least, and he's even scored on some plays. So I'm curious to see because the Rams they've consistently been one of the best pass rushes as far as pressuring the quarterback is concerned and making things difficult for them, but it hasn't turned into sacks. They actually have one of the lower sack rates in the NFL right now, and they only have 31 sacks on the league, which is just a weird number to see because you're literally 5th in overall pressure rate. You're getting after quarterbacks. You're making them uncomfortable. You just quite simply can't finish it off. So if they can get to Aaron Rodgers like we have seen some teams during this season, there's a very good chance that they can shut down that Jets offense and pull off a win here. The other thing I'm curious about, and I just don't quite know if the Jets have it in the tank to do this right now, because Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp, and Puka Nacua are on an absolute tear at the current moment right now. Stafford since week 8, and we've been doing this a lot since week 8, is going back to that marker where they played the Vikings, and Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp came back, surprise, surprise, at the same time. Since then, 16 touchdowns, just 3 interceptions, and he hasn't thrown an interception since week number 10. Matthew Stafford is on fire right now. When you look at a few other numbers as well, against the blitz, 1,100 yards, 8 touchdowns, a singular interception. On top of that, coming out of the play action, best in the league, nearly 1,300 yards, 8 touchdowns, no picks. Matthew Stafford is playing very eerily similar to Rams Super Bowl winning Matthew Stafford from a few years ago back in 2021. I think that there is a real shot if this offense gets hot the way it does. And if the defense can, again, like we talked about, find a way to just get to the quarterback and not just bring the pressure, but take the quarterback down as well, this is a dark horse team that you don't necessarily want to be running into come playoff time. I like the Rams in this game here. I think the cross-country travel is going to make the game a little bit tighter than it would be if it was in LA, but I do like the Rams. I have them winning 28-24. I'm just not quite sure this Jets defense is going to be ready for what Kupp and Nacua bring, and never mind like what Kyron Williams, can do out of the backfield as well now that defenses have to respect the passing game so much. He's been on a bit of a tear himself. I think it's just a lot for this 4-10 Jets team to manage. Now we'll look at an NFC East clash. The Philadelphia Eagles going into Washington to take on the Commanders. Eagles beginning their 3-game divisional stretch to end the season as they play Washington, Dallas, and New York these final 3 weeks of the season. In game number 1, it was basically the Saquon Barkley show as he took over the game in that 26-18 victory for Philadelphia, going for nearly 150 yards and a couple of touchdowns. He averaged 5.6 yards per attempt. Saquon Barkley was the Washington Commanders' living nightmare in the flesh on the ground, and it was something that needs to be addressed coming into this game here. This will be another test for that defensive front, and Jonathan Allen's not playing, so you have to look at guys like Drazon Newton, like Daron Payne, like Dorrance Armstrong. They've got to bottle up, or just honestly not bottle up, but just they need to shut down the running lanes, simply put. And obviously that's easier said than done when you're dealing with Philadelphia. You have one of the best offensive lines in the NFL when it comes to opening up running lanes, and you have one of the best running backs, if not the best running back in the NFL in Saquon Barkley. But it starts with those guys up front. They've got to win their matchups. They've got to close up some of those holes and allow Bobby Wagner, Frankie Lou to come in behind them and plug up the remaining holes and maybe get into the backfield, slow down Saquon Barkley. It's an entire team effort that needs to be done there, but what you had last game cannot happen again, simply put. And then on the flip side of things, like you look at just what's going on between Washington's O-line and then the defensive line of Philadelphia, led by, Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Nolan Smith, who's come on really well this season. There is a literal war in the trenches that is going to be happening in this game here. And Washington, in my opinion, if they're not winning that war in the trenches, they're not winning this football game. A matchup that I'm really intrigued about, though, with this game, and something that I'm very much looking forward to seeing. Terry McLaurin going up against Quinyon Mitchell. For those of you who don't know, the last time these two teams played, these two guys matched up 20 out of the 25 routes that Terry McLaurin ran in that game. And Quinyon Mitchell locked up Terry McLaurin. Now, reminder to everybody, Terry McLaurin, pretty damn good receiver. He's having a career year right now. He's 11 receiving touchdowns this season, which is a career best, and he's on pace to break his reception and yardage mark if he keeps playing the way he does these next 3 weeks. He's going to have career bests in everything, so he's having a literal career year at this point right now. Quinyon Mitchell locked him up, not a single reception. In fact, in that game, Quinyon Mitchell was literally targeted only one time, did not allow a catch in that game. He was a menace in that contest, and a big reason as to why the Commanders' offense was shut down. So I'm really looking forward to seeing round 2 between these two guys, because Quinyon Mitchell, the rookie, defensive rookie of the year candidate, in my opinion, is very much in form, and the fact that he's locking up guys like McLaurin goes to show you just how good this guy actually is. And I'm looking forward to seeing if maybe McLaurin can get him back on that, or if it's just another clinic courtesy of Mitchell. As for who I think is going to win, though, I think I like the Eagles in this one here. The big thing for me, and people keep pointing to the passing game of Philadelphia as a bit of a problem, and they didn't really have a ton of success the first time around these two teams played either. For me, it really is just about what they're doing in the trenches in Philadelphia, both offensively and defensively, that I am so impressed with. And it's some of my favorite type of football to watch. Like, I know that the Philadelphia Eagles offense is not a favorite amongst a lot of people, and that's fine. I enjoy really good offensive line play. And on the flip side, for defense, I love watching guys in the trenches just swallow up O-lines. So what Philadelphia is doing from top to bottom is some of my favorite type of football. I'll take them again for a win here. Tight contest once again. Maybe the Commanders make it a little bit closer, but I have Philadelphia 27-21. Now we'll go back to the AFC North, look at another divisional clash. This one, we have the Cleveland Browns going into Cincinnati to take on the Bengals. Bengals playoff hopes just a little bit brighter. There's like a sliver of light kind of peeking over the horizon right now, it feels like, with Denver losing on Thursday Night Football. Browns have been the Browns, a literal mess with nothing to play for, and basically are only playing to be just kind of a spoiler, I guess you could say, at this point in the season to whoever they go up against. Dorian Thompson-Robinson is going to get the opportunity to start, and honestly, he has an opportunity here. Now, when you look at Dorian, his name is a mouthful to say, and my last name's Christodoulou, but Dorian Thompson-Robinson has a sub 50% career completion rate. He only has a single touchdown to 7 interceptions. This is going to be interesting to see because, for what it's worth, the Bengals defense has not been great and has honestly been kind of a pain to watch at times during this season. They've allowed the 6th most passing yards and 2nd most passing touchdowns this season, coupled with an inefficient pass rush that basically, beyond Trey Hendrickson, who leads the team with 12.5 sacks, and I think nobody else has more than 3, has been the only real pass rush threat for this team. This could be a good opportunity for Dorian Thompson-Robinson to maybe put on some good tape, put something together, and impress in the final few weeks of the season now that the Winston experiment is over. But this is honestly like not a bad team to have this opportunity against, all things considered. There are certain points in the season where we thought Cincinnati was turning it around. They would have like really good games, and then just gaff after gaff. They just let up massive plays. So this is a good opportunity, I would say, there, which leads me to believe that maybe Cleveland could get this game a little bit closer than you'd anticipate it being. But it really just comes down to Thompson-Robinson and what he's able to do. On the flip side, I just genuinely am not sure if if the Cleveland Browns, rather, are able to stop Joe Burrow. The only person that can stop Joe Burrow right now feels like Joe Burrow. Not a bad game the first time these two teams played. 181 yards, couple of touchdowns. Completion percentage around 60%. Not the best. Not horrendous, but not the best, considering where guys usually are these days. But, I mean, you look at Joe Burrow since week number 8, and that was the game against the Eagles just a week after playing Cleveland. He has not thrown less than 3 touchdowns. He's also thrown 5 and 4 touchdowns in that stretch as well in a single game. Joe Burrow's in the thick of like a career season right now, and I mean, defenses are having every single issue and then some trying to stop Jamar Chase at this current moment here. T. Higgins is obviously benefiting from that as well, but Jamar Chase has been a literal menace for defenses to deal with. But Cleveland did hold Jamar Chase into like relative check in comparison to what he's been doing this season. He had only 5 receptions, 55 yards, and a score. Not a bad game. T. Higgins was actually a little bit better in that contest. But, I mean, at the current point that this Bengals offense is in, they are just on a run. And my biggest concern is like Myles Garrett maybe blowing up whoever he's matching up against on the defensive line there in Cleveland, maybe getting to Joe Burrow and disrupting stuff. I would expect a bit of an improvement this time around, especially with the game being in Cincinnati. They're not traveling to Cleveland this time around. I like the Bengals. I like them pretty comfortably. I have no belief in the offense over there in Cleveland anymore. Outside of Jerry Jeudy, I don't really, and David Njoku being the other guy, I guess, that I really like over there, and Jerome Ford has looked good in spots. There's not a whole lot for me to really bank on in Cleveland, so I'm going to take the Bengals pretty comfortably 31-10. I expect this is a game that the Bengals should run away with. If they don't, it's because AFC North game can kind of go that way sometimes, but the Bengals, with the state of the Cleveland Browns, should be running away with this, especially with like that slimmer of hope that your playoff chances are still there. They should be very motivated to win this football game at home. Minnesota going into Seattle. This one could be messy. There's, from everything that I've looked at this current point, could change between now and Sunday. There is rain in the forecast, and it could be messy. That being said, if that's the case, and that's going to be kind of how I base my prediction around, I will definitely be looking at who is going to be running the football more effectively. Minnesota has run the ball a bit more frequently than we've seen from Seattle. They have 388 rushing attempts to the 319 that Seattle has. However, both of the teams are averaging about 4.1 yards per attempt. So as far as like effectiveness is concerned, they're about the same. You just have more yards per game because you're getting more attempts out of Minnesota. Defensively is where I start to lean Minnesota, and I start to lean them pretty heavily. You look at Seattle's run defense allowing 127 yards per game to Minnesota's 89, which is good for second best in the NFL right now, I believe, behind only Baltimore, if I'm not mistaken. It's either Baltimore or KC, one of those two teams up there at the top. But they're second in the league right now when it comes to stopping the run. I am anticipating that Minnesota probably wins this battle here just because, again, they have been more willing to run the football, and teams are not finding a ton of success running against Minnesota. It's just how it is. And if the game gets messy like this, and that's what they're leaning on, the offensive line's been a bit suspect over there in Seattle, whether it comes to pass protection and or just opening up running lanes. So it is something that I'm kind of worried about. And on the topic of the O-line, like I just kind of mentioned briefly here, Seattle protecting Geno Smith is probably the other big concern that I have right now. Seattle's inconsistent issues in pass protection are, at this point, well documented, going way back into Russell Wilson's career at this point and during his time in Seattle. In their last 6 games, Seattle has allowed less than 4 sacks only twice, allowing 7 in 2 games during that span as well. Minnesota's pass rush tied for 4th in the NFL with 42 sacks. They are 2nd in total pressures, 1st in average time to pressure at 2.5 seconds. This does not bode well for Seattle, in my opinion, especially if the game's going to be ugly, messy, wet. I mean, it's already kind of difficult doing all that, so now you're dealing with a team that loves to blitz the football, and Geno Smith, while his completion rate's at about 69% facing the blitz, he's thrown 3 touchdowns to just 5 interceptions, and nobody loves to blitz more than Minnesota does, and they get home pretty often doing so as well. There is definitely a shot that Seattle pulls this one off, and there is I have this weird, I don't want to say gut feeling, but there is this just inkling in the back of my mind that keeps saying Seattle pulls off the win here, and I can't seem to shake that for whatever reason. That being said, though, I am going Minnesota. I like the Vikings in this one here with the way they're playing and the way they're set up right now. I think that they're just in a much better place than Seattle is currently. I know Seattle has a lot more on the line at this current point in the season right now, and that is something that I always consider in a lot of games. But the other thing is Minnesota also has a lot on the line. They're a better team, in my opinion, and if they can keep winning, as the Detroit Lions defense continues to just get bit by the injury bug week after week, they have a shot to steal the NFC North and potentially even the number 1 seed if the Eagles maybe drop another game as well. So there's plenty on the line for Minnesota right now and plenty for them to play for. I would say there's a little more desperation type energy coming from Seattle, you've got to win for your playoff lives, whereas Minnesota has the opportunity to potentially run the table and be the place that the NFC runs through. So both teams have a lot up in the air. I would say a little more desperation from Seattle's end, but I like Minnesota. Give them the win, 24-18, tight lower scoring affair just because, again, if it's going to be raining this bad, I expect it to maybe just keep the score down a little bit more. New England going into Buffalo, AFC East matchup here. Buffalo is a -4, at least the last time I checked. And again, I'm not a betting channel, but I'm always curious just like what Vegas is thinking about certain matchups, and this was one I was very intrigued by. -14 favorite against the spread and -1,000 on the money line. That's like that doesn't even seem like NFL numbers. That's crazy. I believe that's like the most that the Patriots have been underdogs by in about 32 years. Something along those lines, which is crazy to think about. There's not many games that I look at and I go, this is going to be ugly, and I'm not really giving one of the teams much of a shot to win. When you just look at the way these two teams stack up in every facet of football, in the statistics side of things, in the coaching side of things, in the front office side of things, even in the ownership side of things right now, the Bills are better than the Patriots in every shape or form. It's like it extends beyond football at this point now. I don't really know how the Patriots would come out winning this game. I would be shocked if they did. I think a lot of people would be shocked if they did, especially in Buffalo. This is going to be one of those things, and this is kind of how this has already unfolded a bit. Since Bill has left, it feels like we've finally gotten like the page turn for the AFC East. Like the Bills were already kind of starting to run away with the division prior to him leaving. But when Bill departed, now it feels like, okay, this is really Buffalo's division now. And it's time to smack the Patriots around the way they used to smack us around. And I think it starts with this game. I have Buffalo 38-17. I might not be giving Buffalo enough points, and I might even be giving the Patriots too many. I could be completely wrong, well aware of that, but I'm expecting Buffalo to absolutely whoop the Patriots in this one here. Not going to be a close contest, in my opinion. It is what it is. Not a lot to say about this one. I do have some numbers and stuff written down here, but to be honest, Buffalo losing is not really on my radar. The next matchup we're going to be looking at is going to be the Jacksonville Jaguars going into Las Vegas to take on the Raiders. And if you think that this just comes down to who you think the worst team is between the two, that's honestly a fair assessment. But there are some things that are worth looking at as far as the game's concerned. Obviously, Jacksonville going across country all the way to Las Vegas to take on this game, going from East Coast to what is nearly the West Coast at that current point. That is definitely something worth keeping in mind. Aiden O'Connell is under center for the Raiders in this game as well. And then, of course, you can argue both these coaches are going to be coaching for their jobs at this current point. So there's definitely some things to consider between the two teams. On top of that, I'm also very curious if this Jacksonville defense is going to be able to slow down Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers. These two guys are on a bit of a tear as a duo this year, and obviously Brock Bowers is in the middle of a historical campaign for tight ends as a rookie, but honestly just in general, in my opinion. But despite these two only having 6 touchdowns combined, they both have a chance to cross the 1,000-yard receiving mark, so they have been doing a really good job just as a duo, all things considered, with the quarterback situation in Las Vegas this year. Jacksonville against the pass has not been good. Obviously, tied for most in passing touchdowns allowed, and first in passing yards per game allowed. They're allowing the allowing the 10th most receiving yards to tight ends per game. That was hard to read for some reason. And then allowing second most receiving yards to wide receivers per game. So Jacksonville, in a nutshell, has no real ability to stop teams. As far as throwing the football is concerned, there's been a random game or two where they have been able to do it, but for the most part this season, they've not been great. So with Aiden O'Connell back in the fold, I kind of feel good about the Raiders and just their ability to throw the football in this game here. On the other side, though, as far as quarterbacks concerned, since Week 10, we are looking at 4 touchdowns to 7 interceptions for Mac Jones, despite having one of the best pass-protecting O-lines in the NFL, as the Jaguars are ranked somewhere within like the top 10 to 5 of a handful of statistical categories in pass protection. The Raiders have been pretty good against the pass this season, and they are in the top down for fewest passing in terms of passing yards per game and passing yards per play. The Raiders are definitely going to need to try to find an answer for Brian Thomas Jr., who's been having a really good game, but I mean, somebody who lives in the New England area, works in New England sports media, and has had the fantastic opportunity of following Mac Jones' career to this point as closely as I have, I just have a really hard time picking Mac Jones to win football games, especially when he's throwing games away at the very end like he was last week. So you could consider Jacksonville, in my opinion, like the better team overall, but I can't take Jacksonville in this game. I have the Raiders 20-17, bit of a messy contest. This game could really go anyway, and I wouldn't be too surprised. And kind of a crapshoot pick, in my opinion. I had to pick somebody, so I guess I'll take the home team. Next, a game that will essentially put an end to a disappointing season by either one of these two teams, depending on who loses here. If either team loses, playoff hopes are basically all but dead. The 49ers have not had nearly the season I think anyone was anticipating. And honestly, the Dolphins are right in that same boat. Losing Tua, going 1-3 during that stretch has really hurt this team. The two things I'm looking at for this game here, first one is going to be San Francisco and their ability to protect the quarterback against Miami's pass rush. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because Miami's pass rush has found a bit of a rhythm over the last 6 weeks. Aside from their game against Green Bay in the frigid cold, which this game will not be, they've been pretty good. They've racked up 3 or 4 sacks in all but that one game against Green Bay. During that 6-week span, rookie Chop Robinson has really come on strong for them in the pass rush. And this entire just unit up front, considering Jalen Phillips has been gone for quite some time as well, has been pretty impressive with what they're doing. With Trent Williams sounding like he's potentially not going to be back for the remainder of this season, and I would assume is probably done for the year because I don't envision San Francisco making the playoffs with the way that they have looked. It sounds like with that and just the way we've seen this offensive line struggle, there's probably a good chance that Miami gets the tee off. Like, very, very real possibility. They've allowed 14 sacks in that same 6-week span in San Francisco. So, like, the way I'm seeing it right now, this is a broken down 49ers team that is dealing with a Dolphins team that's kind of hurt themselves in a way, but are playing in, like, the right ways that it could be a bit of an issue for the 49ers. The other thing that I'm worried about on the topic of Trent Williams being absent is, of course, the run game has been struggling as well. Not only mentioning the fact that the 49ers have already lost 3 running backs, but Isaac Guerendo might not even play as well because of his hamstring injury. At that point, I don't know who the 5th string running back is. So I'll be curious to see if they have any real opportunity to run the football. Miami is ranked inside the top 10 in both rushing yards per game allowed and rushing yards per attempt allowed. Having a hard time reading notes right now. Some of that success could be in part of the fact that they have seen the 6th fewest rushing attempts this season overall, but I think that with injuries to the running back room, missing a key offensive lineman who, in my opinion, is the best left tackle in the NFL, and I'm sure a lot of people would agree with that, San Fran has a chance. And then again, you have to consider, this is one of the farthest travel distances as well, from San Fran to Miami. There's a piece of me that thinks San Fran could maybe come in and get it done. Defense is still really good in San Francisco, obviously, as well, but something tells me this is where it's like the beginning of the end of this season, and it's going to start with this loss here in Miami. Could obviously be wrong, but I think I really like Miami in this one here. 24-21, tight contest, but I think Miami has just a little bit more juice in the tank offensively, and with what we've seen from the 49ers offense over the last handful of weeks, all due to, in part, a lot of injuries, I'm just having a hard time going with them right now. Then we have ourselves, and I believe this is, yes, Sunday Night Football, Tampa Bay going into Dallas to take on the Cowboys. First matchup that came to mind, Micah Parsons, who has revitalized this pass rush in Dallas since his return from injury. He's going to be facing off against right tackle Luke Godecki for what is going to be the better portion of more than half this football game, most likely. He's lined up on the left side of the defensive line about 60% of his snaps this season. Godecki, he's having himself a pretty good season. Best of his career, mind you, in pass protection right now, as he has allowed pressure on just 7.6% of pass blocks, which is 11th lowest amongst the 38 eligible right tackles in that stat. And that's a minimum of 150 pass blocks, if you're wondering. Lowest of his career. He's having a very strong season. How he fares, and obviously on the opposite end as well, the O-line against Micah Parsons, how they fare, him, Tristan Wirfs, will kind of dictate, I think, how the Bucs offense operates. Because if they're getting I almost said Tampa Bay, excuse me. If they're getting at Baker Mayfield, I would expect that maybe they try to run the football a little bit more heavily, and that has been a bit of an issue for the Dallas Cowboys this season. We've seen Tampa Bay give up 9 sacks in their last 3 games, 4 sacks in back-to-back games against Las Vegas and Carolina during that stretch, and then only 1 last week to LA. So maybe they've kind of figured that out. That was kind of an issue for a couple of weeks, but I do think that Micah Parsons is going to have to will this team to a victory if he wants to get this job done. Even if it is in Dallas, I'm already kind of leaning Tampa Bay as it is. And then there's Rico Dowdle and what he's been doing for Dallas. We've actually seen some good games from Cooper Rush this season, and it's honestly kind of been a nice surprise to see Dallas at 6-8, like scratching and clawing for a potential 7th seed in the playoffs right now has been a little bit of a surprise. But again, something I've kind of enjoyed because I thought this team was cooked and done. Like it just flatline, probably losses the rest of the season with maybe 1 here or there. But the fact that they're still kind of hanging on by a thread, it's been a little bit of a fun thing to watch. The emerging run game has kind of propelled this team to be able to compete, and when you look at Rico Dowdle since week 12, he's averaging nearly 120 yards per game on the ground and about 5.7 yards per attempt. Now, granted, 3 of those 4 teams are in the top 10 worst run defenses in the NFL. Carolina and New York, as we've extensively talked about already today, being numbers 1 and 2 respectively. But maybe they figured something out. I don't know. But I do think it's at least worth mentioning who they were going up against during that stretch. Tampa Bay has been pretty formidable against the run. They rank just outside the top 10 in yards per game allowed. They're 9th in overall run stuff rate. They're tied for 4th lowest in runs over 10 yards or more allowed. So they've been a pretty damn good run defense this year. Nothing is official yet for either of these teams as far as their injury reports are concerned, being it's a Sunday night football game. Those come out slightly later than the rest of them, but there is a monster-sized injury report on both teams. Just take a look at them, see who's dealing with what. Nothing is confirmed, but both of the lists are just pretty long to look at, so way too many for me to just sit here and rattle on about. All that being said, something tells me higher scoring affair. Dallas defense has obviously not been perfect. Tampa Bay's defense has been a little bit better as of late, but they've also shown during stretches of the season that they can struggle. I would not be surprised in some sideways turn of events in this game. We get a higher scoring affair, and I think we're going to see that here. I'm going to take the Bucs, but I'm going to take them 31-27. Something tells me that Dallas hangs around in this, and Tampa, Baker's a gamer. He likes to let it rip. He likes to run with the football. He doesn't really care. I expect this to be one of those types of games where he's going to be doing all kinds of crazy things. Rico Dowdle's probably still going to have a good game. Cooper Rush will be finding CeeDee Lamb like he has been the last few weeks. But I do think Bucs hang on for the win, 31-27. And then to wrap up the week for Monday Night Football, we got the Saints going into Green Bay to take on the Packers here. And New Orleans coming in as banged up as anyone in week number 16. Alvin Kamara may be done for the season. Spencer Rattler is going to get the start again. I'm not putting a ton of stock in the Saints if I just come right out and be honest with you all. The Saints' pass defense has not been great this year. And again, injuries have been an issue for them. Green Bay's leading the league in yak right now, in yak per reception, according to Next Gen Stats, with about 7.1, which honestly checks out because I feel like a lot of these receivers have been catching and going with the football a lot. Jordan Love has been playing really well the last 4 weeks, 7 touchdowns, no interceptions after basically throwing a pick in every single game prior to that this season. He's cleaned it up. He's putting the ball in the right place, not really putting it in a lot of dangerous situations. And with Alvin Kamara out now, you're looking at Kendre Miller, and if he's able to maybe make a spark for this offense and help quarterback Spencer Rattler, the wide receiver room's completely torn up. I mean, running the ball is at this point like a given and something that I'm sure Green Bay is going to expect from them. We've seen Miller average about 4.2 yards per attempt on what he's done in the minimal snaps he's taken so far in his career. Green Bay's allowing about 105 yards per game, which puts them in the top 10 of the NFL, coupled with the top 10 run stuff rate and yards per attempt allowed. I don't have a ton of stock on the Saints in this one here, especially in Lambeau. If this was flipped and we were in New Orleans, okay, maybe a little bit more, but the fact that they're traveling all the way from New Orleans up north to Green Bay, I think this one could be a little bit ugly for the Saints. I like the Packers 28-17 to close out Week 16, get the W, and keep their eyes on the prize, and that is a nice run through the playoffs for them. But those are my predictions for week number 16 in the NFL. I invite you all again, as always, comment down below. Let me hear from you all. Who do you like? Who do you dislike? Who's taking home W's? Who's going home with big L's this week here as we get closer and closer to the end of the season? If you made it to the end, as always, I greatly appreciate it, and I will see you all next time. Have a good one.